From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy. On this week's show, we've taken on the difficult task of redrawing the crucial line between the importance of religious diversity in our political representation and the suborning of our politics to religion-based campaigning. It's the perfect time to do that because, for the first time, a Hindu American will be joining the ranks of the U.S. House of Representatives. On November 6th, voters in Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District elected Iraq War veteran Tulsi Gabbard to represent them in Washington, D.C. Joining me now in the studio is Shukla, co-founder, executive director, and legal counsel for the Hindu American Foundation here in Washington, D.C. I should tell you that Suhag is a friend as well as a colleague. We've even been traveling partners together, and so I am delighted to see her. And Suhag, welcome back to State of Belief Radio.
Thank you for having me.
So much of the politicking this last year was framed in terms of evangelical Christianity and the intensity of what was magnified by the seemingly unlimited money flowing into campaigns thanks to Citizens United decision. Yet voters across the country elected the largest number of women to Congress in history. They affirmed marriage equality. They supported LGBT candidates. They selected the first Buddhist to the U.S. Senate, and they filled her seat in the House with Iraq War veteran and practicing Hindu Tulsi Gabbard. How do you look at all that?
Well, I think it's an exciting time. I think that, at least on the Hill, we're starting to see a representation that reflects America, that reflects the diversity, not only racial, ethnic, but also religious diversity, and that's something we haven't seen before.
And you know what's interesting? Coming from you, I couldn't agree with you more, but there is a lot of brow-wiping, chest-beating going on saying that America is just going downhill.
Well, I guess that's a matter of perspective. I think it's an exciting time for us where to see women come into leadership. Women bring a different perspective, a different way of approaching issues, as do all these other aspects that define each of us, whether it's our religion, whether it's our cultural background. And I think that's only good for America, especially with all the difficult decisions that lie ahead.
It strikes me, too, Suhag, that there is not a blip on the screen among the issues that I've talked about. They're all consistent with each other, that they really are all taking us deeper, stronger toward where the American vision ought to lead us in the first place. What's the significance of having direct representation in the House for Hindu Americans?
Well, Tulsi Gabbard, of course, represents the 2nd District of Hawaii, and that's her priority. But I think for the Hindu American community, it's greatly symbolic as well as practical in terms of someone who we as members of the community can look to as not only a mentor, but as someone to look up to, and also someone who's going to understand the unique issues that affect the community.
Yeah, and I want to pick up on the last one because you and I have talked before about the lack of perspective on some issues that would be brought by someone of this tradition and someone with this history that was not being brought to the discussion. Can you name some of the issues that you think will get a closer, better consideration because of this member of Congress being present?
Well, I can only guess, but I'm hopeful that with Tulsi Gabbard representing Hawaii, as well as being a Hindu American, will put special focus to human rights, specifically the human rights situation of minorities, including Hindus and Christians and Sikhs and a number of other traditions, as long as they're religious minorities throughout South Asia, whether it's Pakistan or Bangladesh. There are serious issues that are ongoing that, while the United States is offering tremendous funding and strategically military assistance there, the human rights aspect of those regions has not been addressed head on. And it's a pretty dire situation, whether there's minorities dealing with kidnapping and forced conversion, forced marriage, being sold into prostitution, whether it's just being able to practice your religious tradition in the open. These are very basic issues, very basic human rights that need to be addressed, and we're hopeful that Tulsi will provide a voice to those that are suffering.
Do you know the new representative personally?
I do. I've had an opportunity to meet her and speak with her as well as her team. And she is a dedicated individual, dedicated to service, and someone who has really had a broad range of experiences, whether it's growing up as a religious minority, whether it is serving in the military. She brings a tremendous amount of experience, and we're excited to see where she goes with that.
Yeah. In your work with the Hindu American Foundation, is this a boost for
Absolutely.
you?
Absolutely. To date, we've had a number of Indian Americans who have run for elected office, whether we have Bobby Jindal in Louisiana and previously in Congress, or Nikki Haley in South Carolina. We were able to, as members of not only the Hindu community, but the Indian American community, see that we were maybe breaking the barriers of race and ethnicity. But those two candidates were very outspoken about their Christian roots. And so what that signaled to us at the foundation, as well as many people in the community, was that there was still somewhat of a religious litmus test that candidates felt that they needed to pass. And in able to pass that test, you maybe had to denounce or deny the heritage of your birth. So Tulsi being there is important in that regard. And certainly when we go on the Hill, she's one of hundreds of elected representatives. But to know that there's one who doesn't need necessarily all the backgrounders and all of the education to bring us to a certain point of understanding, certainly that's going to be helpful.
You may not know the answer to this question, but I can't not ask it. Do you know what she's going to put her hand on when she does her oath?
Word is that it will be a Bhagavad Gita.
Okay.
One of the holy scriptures for Hindus.
Now, you may have to explain that to several members of Congress.
Probably, because the last time anything remotely Hindu occurred was the prayer, and I believe it was before the Senate, and there were some hecklers.
Right.
So hopefully this time around, that was many years ago, and I like to think that America's always progressing forward so that we won't have such issues.
Good. We were talking about the Hindu American Foundation. What are you going to be working on this coming year?
Well, we continue to work on our human rights portfolio, and so continuing to educate our elected leaders about the issues that Hindus in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in other areas, Trinidad, Tobago, Saudi Arabia, where they're facing those issues and keeping them on the forefront. We're also dedicated to the separation of church and state, and I think that this year's election, in many ways, whether it was the gay marriage legislation that was before many states, or the fact that we now have Hindus and Buddhists that are amongst our elected representatives, all of those are a testament to the American people's commitment to separation of church and state, and certainly that's always a priority for the Hindu American Foundation.
And I'm curious about that because from day one with your organization, you've been right in the middle of all of us who are working hard on religious liberty and church-state separation. Does that come out of just Hinduism in America, or is that a part of the tradition of Hinduism?
Well, that's a difficult question. Hinduism is very much about individual freedom. Mm-hmm. And I think then when we look at it in a secular way, it's only a natural outgrowth of that, mm-hmm. that we don't have a central authority that is legislating how a Hindu should act, how, especially in their home, how they practice their religion. And so I think that the separation of church and state, or even just these personal freedoms that we ask for and that have been guaranteed through our Constitution, are very much in line with Hindu teachings.
Mm-hmm. Remind me again of when the Hindu American Foundation first started work.
We are going to turn 10 in January. So 2013 is going to be our big year where we're celebrating a decade of advocacy.
Yeah. And my impression is that if you look back 10 years ago at when you started, that you would have to feel really good about the progress that you've made over a decade, starting from scratch and being the influential organization that you are today. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but it's always good to kind of look back to get a new sense of energy to keep working forward. Prior to the Hindu American Foundation's existence, we didn't have a track record in church state. We didn't have a voice in those issues. We didn't have a voice that was consistently engaging our elected leaders about issues of concern, whether it's immigration, whether it's human rights. And so we've come a long way from a kitchen table mm-hmm. to a full-time staff of 5 and a mm-hmm. permanent office in Washington, D.C., and we look forward to many, many more decades of growth.
Suhag, is there a singular prejudice, or what is the dominant prejudice that you run into related to Hinduism?
I don't know if there's any single prejudice. I think that, like any religious minority, a lot of Hindus might face discrimination in the workplace. Students in schools might be bullied. Mm-hmm. And certainly there's just a general overarching concern about just the understanding of Hinduism, whether it's how Hinduism is portrayed in textbooks or in the media. All of those things are different pieces of this puzzle that continue to lead to kind of a misunderstanding about Hinduism. But that said, I think that with the popularity of yoga, of Ayurveda, and a number of other Hindu practices, there's more and more interest and understanding of Hinduism.
Are Hindus by instinct or bent politically oriented, or are they not so activist?
I don't know if the community is activist per se, but certainly they are politically engaged as voters. And this year I know that there were several efforts out in the community to get people registered to vote. Mm-hmm. And a number of articles, interestingly enough, about where Hindu Americans should put their or place their allegiance in terms of which party. So there were compelling arguments as to why Hindus should be part of the Democratic Party, and there were equally compelling arguments as to why Hindus should be Republican. And in many ways, we kind of see that at the Hindu American Foundation because we're bipartisan. Mm-hmm. And depending on what the issue is, we do seek and get support from both sides of the aisle.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, if there are Hindus in your earshot that aren't very activist, once they meet you and become acquainted with you and listen to you, they're going to be activists because you have you've driven the organization so wisely, and the organization has developed with such great maturity that I'm just amazed at how far you've come in a short time.
Well, I appreciate that. And, we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the community support. So there are, while the first generation or the first waves of the Hindu American community put all of their effort and their resources into building the institutions that would ensure that Hinduism was preserved, we're happy to take on the mantle and now amplify those efforts and create a public voice. And we wouldn't be here if it weren't for the community having that foresight of the need to do the kind of work that we're doing.
I know we have some listeners that have heard this interview and they're saying, I really would like to find out more about the Hindu American Foundation. How is the best way for them to do that?
Well, our website has tremendous amounts of information about the kind of work we do, the kinds of policies that we forward, and that's available at www.hafsite.org.
Okay. Suhag Shukla is co-founder, executive director, and legal counsel for the Hindu American Foundation. Suhag, I really have enjoyed getting to know you through the years, and our travels in Israel together created, I think, an even stronger bond. I am so impressed, as I said, with the way in which you've guided this work. I want to wish you continued success in what you're doing, and you'll always be welcome in this studio to be on State of Belief.
Well, thank you, and it's always a pleasure to see you.